the name of perhaps building manufacturing in this country, which they won't do, or in the name of raising revenue to cut taxes for the wealthy, which is adding insult to injury, or simply for vengeance. So much of what this administration does is for the purpose of vengeance and vanity. Careless, cruel, reckless. That's what these tariffs are, particularly as directed to Canada. Let's be clear. The tariffs proposed by President Trump are a tax. They are a tax. There's no tariff ever imposed in the history of the United States of America that has ever lowered prices. These tariffs will raise prices, and they threaten not only higher costs for everything from gas to groceries to rental housing, but they also deeply threaten a recession. I've been reading a book called Freedom from Fear, written by a great historian, a professor at Yale named David Kennedy. Freedom from Fear is about the events and the misdirection and mistakes that led our nation to the Great Depression. What began as a recession, what started as a Wall Street problem, became a global depression because the world failed to realize that even then our economies were connected and that tariffs could hurt all countries when all countries adopted them, when a trade war ensued, and a trade war now is what we face. Canada has long been one of our nation's closest allies and trading partners. We have a bond with Canada that goes beyond simple economics. Although, frankly, our relationship with Canada supports millions of jobs, protects the competitiveness of American businesses, and ensures our long-term economic prosperity. Our countries have countless trade and investment agreements, cross-border projects, such as communications, highways, bridges, pipelines, that have resulted in integrated networks and transportation systems. We have a long-standing defense and security partnership, providing us with greater security than we could have alone. And we share a border. But the border is a symbol of a bond that our peoples have in common. A friendship that goes deep, a heritage and a culture that we respect. These bonds will be betrayed by a reckless trade policy the administration is pursuing and threatens to derail that valuable, in fact, precious partnership. These tariffs are going to hurt all Americans. We have, with Canada, one of the most comprehensive and important trading relationships. I go into the numbers. In 2024, Canada was the United States' second largest trading partner with $761.2 billion in total trade, largest single U.S. export markets for goods. Every day, nearly 500,000 people and billions of dollars in goods and services cross that border. But I want to focus on Connecticut for the moment, because Connecticut demonstrates what will happen to America as a whole, and I represent the people of Connecticut, and this regimen of tariffs will be catastrophic for Connecticut. Friends in Connecticut, listen to what these haphazard tariffs will do. Canada is Connecticut's single largest trading partner, accounting for 20% of our total trade in 2024, including 13% of our imports and 13% of our exports and 25% of our imports. Consumers in Connecticut already face some of the highest electricity prices in the nation, with an average cost of 28.16 cents per kilowatt hour compared to the national average of 16.26 cents per kilowatt hour. Connecticut and New York as a whole get a significant share of our electricity from cheaper Eastern Canadian hydropower. The 10% tariffs proposed on energy resources from Canada will directly impact and drastically increase those electricity costs. ISO New England has estimated that this tax would add $66 million in annual consumer costs. I hope President Trump will listen to the people of Connecticut and New England when it comes to electricity costs. Do not impose these tariffs. And the harm to Connecticut is far from limited to just energy prices. Some of the largest state industries, including aerospace, defense, advanced manufacturing, medical devices, all rely on trade with Canada to remain profitable. These industries source key production imports from Canada, including aerospace parts, critical minerals and metals, basic chemicals and petroleum and coal products, and in return we export billions of dollars of goods to Canada. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people across Connecticut, jobs, employment, all stand to see their livelihoods threatened if this tax is allowed. And it will ripple across Connecticut. It will reverberate through the country, to the presiding officer state, to Virginia, New York, Maryland, colleagues on both sides of the aisle. The cost of living in Connecticut will rise drastically. We already have one of the highest costs of living in the country. Taxing these goods will put an undue financial strain on individuals and families across Connecticut, but most important, on people who can least afford a higher tax, our middle income and lower income members of the workforce, working people in Connecticut who have to buy stuff depending on their paychecks, for groceries, for gasoline. A tax on those products will hit them in the pocketbook, it will hit their families, it will hit them at the kitchen table when they go to the drugstore to buy pharmaceuticals, when they have down payments on homes, on furnishings, across the board. So I am not here to make a speech. I'm really here to make a plea. Mr. President, please reconsider. These tariffs are fundamentally misguided. They are dumb. They are cruel, reckless, and careless. They play fast and loose with America's credibility around the world. And I urge my colleagues to vote yes on Senate Joint Resolution 37 and join us in trying to save the American economy and our credibility around the world. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
I recognize the Democrat leader.
Thank you, and thank my friend from Connecticut for his excellent words. Much of what he said could be applied to New York. I want to thank Senator Kaine for his seeing around the curve, seeing how important this was months ago, and persisting and persisting and persisting in getting us to this place. Now, Mr. President, President Trump just announced his new tariff package a few hours ago, and it's even worse than we thought. In addition to the tariffs that he has already imposed, he now has a 10% across-the-board tariff on all products. What is this going to do to American families? It's going to clobber them. It's estimated that the Trump tariff will add about $5,000 to the average family's cost. And why is he doing it? to reduce taxes on the billionaires. They've said that. Navarro and he have said it over and over again that they want to reduce those taxes. It is outrageous. It is outrageous. The average family sitting at the kitchen table on Friday night is saying to themselves, whoa, boy, we better cut back on our purchases. Maybe we ought not go out to the restaurant. Maybe we ought not to take that vacation we've been saving up for a year. Maybe we ought not to buy that new car. Consumer confidence is lower than it's been in many, many years. The average business, because of the chaotic nature, Trump says one thing one day and another thing the next day, are holding back. Businesses, small and large, need certainty. But there's no certainty here with the chaos that Donald Trump has created. And listen to this. When told that it would raise the costs on the American family, Trump himself said he couldn't care less if prices go up. What kind of bubble is he living in? These billionaires who are running the country, Trump, Musk, Lutnick, they're in such a bubble they don't know how the average family is hurting. Yeah, they're billionaires. God bless them. They made a lot of money. But don't think that average people are in the same boat. The costs of groceries, the costs of prescription drugs, the cost of gasoline, the costs of buying a car, the costs of buying a house, the costs of furniture, the costs of clothing, everything people buy is going to go up. Donald Trump said he'd reduce prices on day one when he got elected. He's doing just the opposite with these tariffs. He's raising prices through the roof and strangling American families. My colleague in Connecticut alluded to Smoot-Hawley. The new Smoot-Hawley is Trump-Musk. These taxes could create a global trade war. Our allies, previous allies, are allying together how they're going to get back at Trump and what he's done to the country. This is not Liberation Day, as Trump called it. This has made a few weeks earlier, in effect, tax day. Huge taxes through tariffs on American families. It's a gut punch. It's a gut punch for the average American. And so, right now, I know Donald Trump is pressuring Senate Republicans to vote this resolution down. He's treating this like a loyalty test. But my plea to my Senate Republican colleagues, stand with the American people. You know how bad this is. A few of you have already said you can't vote for this. Please, don't be intimidated by Donald Trump, who said he couldn't care less if prices go up on your constituents, my Republican colleagues. Don't listen to him. This is a disaster for working families, a disaster for the nation's economy, a disaster for our alliances and relationships around the world, all doing so much to hurt America for one darn reason: cutting taxes for the billionaires. This is a government by the billionaires. Everything they do, whether it's this budget they came out with today or this tariff bill, is in obeisance to the very few wealthy people who seem to control the Republican Party and want another tax cut. I urge everybody to vote against these horrible, horrible tariffs. Tariffs on Canada have very little to do with fentanyl, we know that. Tariffs on Canada and all the other countries he's now added to the list have everything to do with tax breaks, more tax breaks for billionaires. I strongly, strongly urge a no vote. This bill is worse than what we had thought. He made it worse when he announced what he was doing a few hours ago. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Senator Kaine for his leadership on this issue. President Trump's new tariffs are not Liberation Day, they're Obliteration Day. They are going to be remembered as something that raised taxes on every American consumer, had foreign countries then attack businesses all across our nation, all without a plan from President Trump to have an end game. President Trump is just making this up. And we're going to have to wait to see how he responds when Europe attacks us, when Canada attacks us, when Asian countries now attack us. He's inviting an attack upon the American economy, even as American consumers have to pay higher taxes. So we're at just the dawn of the equivalent of an all-out war, trade war, with every other country in the world. And who's going to pay the price? American workers and American taxpayers. They're the ones who are going to pay the price. So, Mr. President, I rise tonight to speak about the outrageous calls we have been hearing to impeach federal judges who have ruled against Donald Trump. And that's right. Donald Trump and his extremist MAGA supporters think that if a federal judge dares to rule against the president, that judge should be impeached. Recently, Trump tweeted that Judge James Boasberg, the chief judge of the federal district court here in Washington, D.C., should be impeached because he ruled against Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador without any due process. Elon Musk, whose Department of Government Efficiency has been on the losing side of several recent judicial decisions, has referred to federal judges as evil and called for, quote, a wave of judicial impeachments. In the other body, MAGA extremists have taken up the cudgel and filed articles of impeachment against federal judges who have ruled against the president, and then they receive political contributions from Elon Musk for doing so. And just last week, Speaker Johnson even suggested eliminating entire federal courts because their judges have dared to rule against Donald Trump. These calls for the impeachment of judges and elimination of courts are just the latest salvos in a broad attack on the courts, on lawyers, on the rule of law by the president and by his allies. I come to the Senate floor today to condemn this dangerous and un-American onslaught against the judiciary and legal profession and urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to speak out against it. Federal judges confirmed by the Senate and given life terms under the Constitution during good behavior are not like contestants on The Apprentice. You don't get to fire them because you don't like the way they are doing their job. The president and his acolytes don't seem to understand this. With each call to impeach judges, they disregard and disrespect the Constitution, its separation of powers, its checks and balances, and its establishment of three co-equal branches of government, one of which is a judiciary whose principal job, as the Supreme Court explained more than 200 years ago in Marbury versus Madison, is to, quote, say what the law is, to say what is constitutional. And that is precisely what the courts have been doing. Since retaking office, Donald Trump has issued a series of executive orders that are blatantly, patently, and obviously unconstitutional and illegal. Trump's illegal belief that he can supersede the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress with an executive order has spawned more than 100 lawsuits against his administration. And federal judges across the country, judges appointed by Democrat and Republican presidents alike, including Donald Trump himself, are doing the same job that judges have done in our country for centuries. They are interpreting statutes, making legal determinations, and upholding the Constitution of the United States. They are moving swiftly to hear cases and, for now, preventing some of the most egregiously unlawful Trump policies from taking effect. Revoking birthright citizenship, blocked. Freezing all federal funding, blocked. Pulling down public health websites, blocked. Capping funding for critical health research at the National Institutes of Health, blocked. Denying gender-affirming health care to transgender youth, blocked. Allowing Musk to unbridled access to Social Security data, blocked. Clawing back funds appropriated by Congress and obligated to my National Climate Bank, blocked by a federal district court judge. And the list goes on and on and on and on. Blocked, 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 blocked. In these cases, like any others, if the losing party disagrees with the judge's decision on what the law is, they can appeal it. What they shouldn't do is to call for the extraordinary step of impeaching the presiding judge. That is a remedy the Constitution reserves for only grave ethical or criminal misconduct. And that's why John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States, was compelled to issue a rare public statement after President Trump called for the impeachment of Judge Boasberg. Without referring to the president directly, the Chief Justice nonetheless rebuked him, explaining that, quote, for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement, and that, quote, the normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. Unfortunately, the MAGA extremists calling for impeachment of judges or the elimination of the courts don't care about this. The Constitution, centuries of judicial norms, the rule of law, they only care about one thing: fealty to Donald Trump. The baseless calls for Chief Judge Boasberg's impeachment confirm that. This is a judge who was a Yale Law School graduate, who cut his teeth as a successful homicide prosecutor, who was first appointed to the bench by a Republican president more than 20 years ago, who was confirmed to the federal bench in a 96-0 vote, and who was named by Chief Justice Roberts to a seat on the United States Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, where he served a 7-year term, including as the court's presiding judge. Yet, this is the judge, widely respected throughout the judiciary and legal profession, who President Trump calls a, quote, radical left lunatic, a troublemaker, and an agitator. That's Trump talking about Judge Boasberg, just because he ruled against the administration in a preliminary decision, which, by the way, a 3-judge panel of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals last week upheld on review. So while Trump's ad hominem attack on Judge Boasberg was typically baseless, it and other attacks like it leveled against other judges are no less dangerous. They have given rise to increased threats against judges, a, quote, significant uptick, as Chief Justice Roberts put in his report on the federal judiciary at the end of last year. Indeed, according to the Chief Justice, U.S. Marshals Service data showed a tripling of hostile threats and communications directed at judges over the preceding decade. Recently, judges have also experienced the swatting of their homes, the delivery of pizzas to their homes, actions intended to send the message, we know where you and your family live, where your children are. So reach the result which we want. Be afraid. Be very afraid. This is wrong. Very wrong. It is dangerous. It is intended to pressure judges in their decision-making. It puts lives at risk. It deserves the strongest possible across-the-board condemnation by all senators and all Americans. Instead, my Republican colleagues have been awfully quiet, fearful of upsetting President Trump, who has followed the Godfather Part 1 playbook and made them an offer they can't refuse. A primary opponent if they just don't go along. Well, finally, I have a few words about Donald Trump's unprecedented executive orders targeting law firms and individual lawyers who have litigated against him. These orders have suspended security clearances, canceled government contracts, barred employees from federal buildings, and erected other obstacles that prevent lawyers from representing their clients. Trump has even directed the Department of Justice to seek sanctions against attorneys who file frivolous lawsuits or engage in vexatious litigation against him. So with Donald Trump coming after lawyers and law firms, It's gut check time for law firms in our country, especially the big law firms that the president has targeted for revenge and retribution because of their lawyers daring to do their jobs and represented clients in cases against him. I commend those firms, like WilmerHale, like Jenner and Block, who are standing up, who are fighting back. And we need all law firms to stand up to this administration and to continue to stand up for the rule of law. And those that don't, especially those that seek to appease and accommodate the president out of fear that their bottom line will suffer grave risk, grave harm to our liberties, will in fact depend upon the lawyers who take difficult and unpopular cases, often against the government, and zealously representing their clients in those matters. I'll conclude with this. The attacks on our judiciary, the calls for the impeachment of judges, and the attempts to intimidate and retaliate against lawyers who dare to stand in defense of the Constitution are not just an assault on individuals. They are an assault on the very foundations of our democracy. The courts are not pawns in a political game. The rule of law is not up to negotiation. If we allow this dangerous precedent to take root, if we tolerate threats against judges and lawyers who fulfill their constitutional duties, we set the stage for the erosion of the checks and balances that have safeguarded our nation for over 2 centuries. This is not about protecting one man. This is about protecting the principles that ensure justice and fairness for all Americans. It is time for all of us as a nation to rise above partisan interests and defend what makes us strong, our commitment to the Constitution, to the independence of the judiciary, and to the rule of law. And I urge my colleagues, all of my colleagues, and every American to stand in defending these sacred institutions, not for our political health, but for the health of our democracy itself. I thank you, and I yield back, Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I'm here in support of Senator Kane's effort to get this body to take a public view on President Trump's mad declaration that we have a border emergency with Canada happening right now. I can tell you that if I go home to Rhode Island and ask people what the emergency is in their lives, I wouldn't get one person who said, oh, we've got a real emergency with Canada. They're a huge threat. That whole Canada situation, boy, that's dangerous. This is nutty stuff. And it's dangerous stuff economically. Just in Rhode Island, Canada is our largest international trading partner. 22% of Rhode Island's exports are to Canada. And we import from Canada as well. And when the tariffs get reciprocated by our Canadian friends after this ridiculous behavior by President Trump, then that's going to affect all Rhode Islanders. We buy a lot of energy, for instance, from Canada. And that's going to raise costs for Rhode Island families. It's a direct hit to people's pocketbooks. And as has been pointed out, this is just a shady way to hit Americans in the pocketbook, to raise revenue, so that this phony baloney budget resolution we're about to have to deal with can open up revenues that they can then use as a justification for lowering taxes for the billionaires and the big corporations who already pay way too little in taxes. Some billionaires pay no income taxes at all. The corporate share of America's revenue has gone from about 30% of America's revenue down to single digits. That's just a huge sucking sound pulling out of America's revenue, the revenue of corporate entities, and it's not the mom and pop flower store. It's the huge multinational that goes and pretends that it's doing its business in Ireland or the Cayman Islands or someplace and hides profits. This is a tax racket against the American people that is now being propped up and made worse by a tariff racket against the American people. And the excuse is one of the dumbest ones ever, that the emergency is fentanyl. Well, Rhode Island was at the heart of the opioid epidemic. That's why I worked with Senator Portman to pass the CARA bill, the biggest addiction recovery response bill this body has ever passed. I take this issue deadly seriously. Not the president, not the president. 0.2% of the fentanyl in America comes across the enormous Canadian border. If you did it like per mile of the American border, it would be unmeasurably small. And over this fake excuse that there's a huge fentanyl problem, 0.2%, they're going to dump enormous new expenses on American families. People have called this a sales tax, and it kind of is, because what it does is it raises prices. It raises prices because the money that the federal government takes in has to be recovered. And it gets recovered from families, from people who are paying higher prices for imported goods or higher prices for the domestic freeloaders who are going to raise their prices to match the imported goods, just the way the fossil fuel industry raised their prices to match the foreign prices of fuel after the Ukraine invasion, and so gorged themselves that they made the biggest profits off the American people in the history of corporations. It was the biggest gouge ever by the scoundrels of the fossil fuel industry, and now we're opening the door for this to happen across all industries. American families are going to be hurt, and they're going to be hurt hard, and it just puts revenues on the books that the Republicans can then use to go and do what they really want to do here, which is to make sure that all their billionaire cronies, everybody who's surrounding Trump, all the pals in the cabinet, all the ones who write the big checks to the super PACs and who fund Republican politicians, that they don't have to pay taxes anymore. It's Leona Helmsley Day here in the Senate. Taxes are just for the little people. This is a disgrace, and I hope there'll be a few voices on the Republican side to recognize that considering the Canadian border to be an emergency is preposterous. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I rise to bring the attention of this body to a broken promise by our president. Our president promised in the campaign and recently in an address to all of us here in Congress to make America affordable again, to deal with the high prices of groceries, of fruits and vegetables, of housing supplies, of energy, to deal with high prices. Millions of Americans who voted for President Trump said they did so out of frustration about high prices. Well, today, President Trump has announced he is going to impose tariffs on virtually every trading partner we have. And I rise in support of a piece of legislation we're about to vote on here in the Senate that gives us a chance to do something. So to my colleagues, if you've heard as I have, from your constituents calling with concern and alarm about how much prices have not gone down but have gone up, I recommend you think about one country, one of our most trusted and loyal allies, some of the nicest people on the planet. Who doesn't like Canadians? Canadians have served alongside us in virtually every war we've ever fought. They are a NATO ally and partner. And for my small but mighty state of Delaware, our major export destination and the nation from which we import the most. And yet, because of an emergency at our border, which I think is wholly unjustified by the data of how little fentanyl actually comes into our country across the northern border, President Trump is moving ahead with slapping tariffs on Canada. Tonight you have a chance, I say to my colleagues, to vote to undo the declaration of an emergency on our northern border. You can vote to undo the harm to businesses, to small families, to retirement accounts. Don't look at your 401k. If you want to know tomorrow the consequences of indiscriminately slapping tariffs on every one of our major trading partners. This is not Liberation Day, but Tax Day, a new national sales tax that will harm the imports we buy from virtually every country, and because of the countervailing tariffs, harm our exports. A tariff is a tax. And tonight we will take a vote, and I hope some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join with Senator Kaine and many of us in recognizing it is ludicrous to use the special emergency powers that Congress gave to the president, assuming he would only do so in a case of war or active open hostility, not in the case of one of our trusted and loyal partners and allies, the great and kind people of Canada. In recent meetings with Canadian leaders, they've said, don't make us do it. Don't make us impose tariffs on you. But tonight, the Trump administration has imposed tariffs on dozens and dozens of our trading partners. To my friends and colleagues, let's vote to undo this phony crisis and vote to undo the tariffs on U.S.-Canada trade. Thank you.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak in opposition to the resolution. Senator Kaine and his fellow co-sponsors want a strong trade relationship with Canada. So do I. I consider, like President Reagan, Canadians to be not just friends and neighbors and allies, but kin, who together with us have built the most productive relationship between any two countries in the world today. By the way, I would note that the tariffs that President Trump announced today did not get applied to Canada. What we're talking about here today, however, in Senator Kaine's resolution, is not about our trading relationship. It is about the emergency stemming from fentanyl and illegal immigration. Senator Kaine and the other co-sponsors are challenging the how, meaning the means of what President Trump is doing, the threat of tariffs, through which President Trump addresses a national emergency. The Senate, however, is set up to vote on this proposal, however, today, on the why, whether an emergency exists. Under President Biden's watch, the number of people arrested on the northern border rose more than tenfold from 2022 to 2024. Indeed, publications like The Economist and the New York Times, documented here, showed extensively how the northern border has become increasingly insecure over the last year, with a massive spike in the number of migrant crossings. Just look at the spike on the chart. This is the New York Times reporting. And what do they say? Illegal migrant crossings skyrocketed 50-fold under the Biden-Harris administration at the northern border. That includes New York. Indeed, we have a crisis at the northern border. It is a fentanyl crisis and a migration crisis. In considering these figures, I want to emphasize, I don't blame Canada. I blame President Biden. President Biden repeatedly refused to prioritize border security. Indeed, when President Biden's nominee for the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection came through the Finance Committee, I asked him if he would at least admit that there was a border emergency, including on the southern border as well as the northern border. He, like President Biden himself, refused to take it seriously, with dire consequences for our communities in America. When President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau met last year, the Biden administration's top priorities included encouraging both countries to increase climate spending and advance diversity and inclusion. But when it came to common priorities that Americans actually wanted to see progress on, like combating illegal immigration, President Biden's view was that we should both, Canada and the United States, should both expand pathways to allow more migrants into the country and to promote Canada accepting 15,000 migrants. President Trump is right to change this trajectory, precisely because Canadians also are victims of illegal immigration and fentanyl. We must both prioritize these threats to our citizens. To sum it up, when my colleagues and I meet constituents who suffered at the hands of criminal elements which crossed illegally into the United States or from smuggled fentanyl, we do not consider them to be any more or less a victim depending on which border their harm illegally crossed. We say the most important thing is that this crisis must stop. Under President Trump, it is stopping. Accordingly, I encourage my colleagues to vote no on the resolution.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I rise for some concluding comments. I believe the vote will follow. I want to acknowledge my colleague from Idaho, his comments about the northern border. This is a bill that is fundamentally about tariffs. I acknowledge what my colleague said, that there are issues at the northern border, and I have colleagues who have shared that, and there's mechanisms for working out those issues. And I would ask my colleagues, if you're concerned about any issue on the northern border, do you think we will more likely to be able to deal with it if we work hand in hand with Canada, or do you think the path to success is punitive actions against Canada? I would argue plainly that the right way to deal with any issue at the border with Canada is to work with Canada, not wage a trade war against them. This vote, though, is fundamentally about tariffs. The president's imposition of tariffs against Canada that will be a costly tax increase on American families. If the president has concerns about trade issues with Canada, guess what? This president negotiated a signature trade deal, the USMCA, that got 89 bipartisan votes in this chamber, and he has a negotiating process to find a resolution to any issue he cares about. The imposition of tariffs does nothing more than put a tax on American families. What I'd like to do, I did speak earlier today, but what I'd like to do is just read quickly from many stakeholders who have weighed in support of Senate Joint Resolution 37. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, quote, "Tariffs are taxes paid by Americans, and they will quickly increase prices at a time when many are struggling with the cost of living. That's why it's appropriate for Congress to exercise its authority under EPA and pass Senate Joint Resolution 37. North American building trades, quote, the United States and Canada share far more than a border. We share a deep, enduring economic and workforce partnership that has strengthened both nations. That partnership is enshrined in the USMCA, a comprehensive trade agreement that President Trump himself negotiated. We shouldn't circumvent this agreement. Sheet metal workers, tariff penalties aimed at Canada for non-trade objectives have already caused harsh and unnecessary economic pain for U.S. workers and harm to our nation's construction and related metal fabricating businesses. National Retail Federation. U.S. retailers depend on Canada for a wide range of consumer goods. These operations are all now being significantly disrupted because of the tariffs applied to Canada. U.S. Conference of Mayors, these actions are raising prices for consumers, disrupting key industries such as construction and manufacturing. They also risk increasing already high housing costs as lumber, steel, aluminum, other critical building materials will make housing more expensive. The AFL-CIO, imposing large across-the-board tariffs on Canada aimed at non-trade objectives will only cause unnecessary economic pain for workers and businesses. The International Association of Machinists, these new tariffs on Canada, one of our closest allies, are unjust and will have a lasting negative impact on American and Canadian workers. The National Taxpayers Union, Canada is an important supplier of goods that strengthen U.S. security, including crude oil, natural gas, steel, and aluminum. Tariffs that restrict our access to these supplies and increase their cost will weaken our industrial base. The Taxpayer Protection Alliance, TPA, enthusiastically supports the effort to overturn President Trump's February 1 national emergency declaration. This use of the IEPA is fraught with issues. The ensuing trade war will inevitably raise costs for consumers. United Steelworkers, these new tariffs are misdirected, unsubstantiated by facts, and harmful to the very workers we represent. And finally, Advancing American Freedom, the think tank formed by former Vice President Mike Pence. Tariffs are a tax on American families and business. The first Trump administration cut an excellent deal with Canada, with the USMCA. The president should not abandon this agreement. We have a chance to stand strong for our businesses and consumers, our foresters and farmers, our national defense industry and shipbuilders against cost increases that will hurt people's pocketbooks, hurt American competitiveness, and hurt our national security. I urge my colleagues, vote yes on Senate Joint Resolution 37. I will yield back all time on the resolution.
All time is yielded back. Under the previous order, the clerk will read the title of the joint resolution a third time.
SJ Res 37, terminating the national emergency declared to impose duties on articles imported from Canada.
The question occurs on passage of the joint resolution. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be.
Ms.
The clerk
Also
will
Brooks.
call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn. Gotcha. Thank you. Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice,
No.
Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young, Senators voting in the affirmative: Collins, Coons, Kane, Kelly, King, Klobuchar, Murray, and Ossoff. Senators voting in the negative: Barrasso, Blackburn, Capito, Cornyn, Kramer, Crapo, Curtis, Daines, Graham, Grassley, Justice, Marino, Mullen, Rounds, Sheehy, Sullivan, Thune, Tillis, and Tuberville.
Mr. Cotton, no. Mr. Padilla, aye. Mr. Kim, aye. Ms. Smith, aye. Mr. Cassidy, no.
Mr. Ricketts, no. Ms. Blunt-Rochester, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto, aye. Mr. Wicker, no. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Reed, aye. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Gallego, aye. Miss Ernst, no. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, no. Mr. Schiff, aye. Mrs. Brett, no. Mr. Young, no. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Durbin, aye. Ms. Rosen, aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, no. Mr. Langford, no. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Husted, no. Mr. Schmidt, no. Ms. McCormick, no. Mr. Warnock, aye. Mr. Kennedy, no. Ms. Duckworth, aye. Mr. Hawley, no. Mr. Rono, aye. Mrs. Fisher, no. Mr. Schatz, aye. Mr. Peters, aye. Mr. Lujan, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. McConnell, aye. Ms. Lummis, no. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mrs. Moody, no. Mr. Welch, aye. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Budd, no.
All for
Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Markey, aye. Mr. Johnson, no. Mr. Scott of Florida, no. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Murphy, aye. Yeah. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, aye. Oh, yeah. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Mr. Hoven, no. Ms. Slotkin, aye. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Booker, aye. Ms. Markowski, aye. Mr. Banks, no. Mr. Van Hollen, aye. Mr. Haggerty, no. Mr. Warner, aye. Damn right. Ms. Warren, aye. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Merkley, Mr. Merkley, aye. Ms. Also Brooks, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. Ms. Hassan, aye.
Okay. The yeas are 51. The nays are 48. The joint resolution is passed. The yeas are 51. The nays are 48. The joint resolution's passed.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent that with respect to SJ Res 37, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, April 3rd, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal proceedings be approved to date, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed, and notwithstanding Rule 22, the Senate resume consideration of SJ Res 24, that all time be expired on the joint resolution 11 a.m., and the Senate vote on passage of the joint resolution. Further, following disposition of the joint resolution, the Senate proceed to executive session and resume calendar number 46, and the Senate execute the order of April 2nd in relation to the Sauer nomination. And following disposition of the Sauer nomination, the Senate vote on the motion to invoke cloture on calendar number 53. Amendment ayes. Further, notwithstanding Rule 22, it be in order for Senator Sanders to make two motions, discharge SJ Res 33 and SJ Res 26, and the Senate vote on the motions to discharge in the order listed if made at 2:30 p.m. Further, following